And joining us in studio, Tsepo Khadima, political analyst, Oliver Dixon, a social-political analyst, Themba Gordy, chairperson of Parliament Standing Committee on Public Accounts. He's on the phone line. Gentlemen, good evening to you and thanks so much for joining us. Mr. Gordy, just firstly, what do you make out of this SARS KPMG tussle?
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Well, we were puzzled in the extreme by the conduct of the KPMG. It sounds very bizarre, and I think it is not something they just woke up to one morning. They must have sat through it, thought it through. What the ultimate intent is, we're not sure. But from where we're standing in Scopa, we have always had a thing about, the use of consultants in government. And when we're dealing with the IFMS, our eyebrows were raised to the questionable conduct of Deloitte and the fact that KPMG was one of the companies, or in fact KPMG itself was paid almost 5 million rand before it could even deliver the work for which it has been contracted, which for us raised serious questions about their conduct and their relationship with officers within National Treasury. So when this came up, we felt, enough is enough. This has to be tackled because it has very serious implications, not only for KPMG, but even for government. I'm just making words to explain what it means, but it's almost like they have no respect for government, they have no respect for South Africans. They can just throw all of us, under the bus, and it should be business as usual. And we say, no, it cannot be business as usual.
You're saying that the sovereignty of the country is threatened by the attitude of the multinational auditing firm KPMG, but SARS has also called for KPMG to be blacklisted, not to do work with the state going forward. Your view?
Well, look, KPMG is a multinational company, and unless they come up with something credible, it will merely reflect, the kind of attitude that multinationals have when they operate in colonial countries. They just don't care. They just do as they please. Now, we in Scopa, we've issued a statement that we want to call KPMG. If everything goes well, I think week after next, we should be sitting down with them. Give them the platform to actually clarify themselves to the public and to Parliament. But most importantly, to tell us why do they think government should continue doing business with them. And I think it is at that point that we'll be able to say whether we are satisfied, we think they have explained themselves sufficiently, or whether we would say, well, we think this is just part of undermining the sovereignty of our country. Therefore, government should not have any business, pouring government money into your coffers when you show scant respect for the country.
Please stay on the line, Mr. Gordy. We have Tsepo Khadima and Mr. Oliver Dixon in studio. Khadima, the reliance or over-dependence on the likes of KPMG over the years in government structures, what does the latest revelation show? That a report that was finalized 18 months ago, certain parts of it is now being retracted, if you will.
Yeah, the over-reliance on consultants is certainly something that some of us have been raising question marks on for the last 5 years at least. I say this is not sustainable. So we are not surprised in the least that things are eventuating in this manner. I must congratulate Scopa for affording KPMG due process in terms of observing the audi alteram partem. However, I think what KPMG has to go and justify themselves before Parliament or before Scopa at least is going to be an exceedingly difficult duty to discharge. I just cannot see how they'll be able to discharge that duty. particularly taking into account that the announcement on Friday was unprecedented. I don't think that we've ever again, I mean, at least since the fall of Arthur Andersen, which was again based on accountancy fraud on Enron and Wellcom, that we have seen. I mean, we saw there, by the way, Arthur Andersen had to go belly up, amongst other reasons, because there were indictment to be criminally charged. So the question is that will our law enforcement agencies in South Africa have the appetite to criminally charge? Because here we have an admission of wrongdoing, an admission of fraudulent conduct. There's no way to reduce it to any other thing other than that KPMG here has admitted to fraud, and the question is therefore, with fraud being a crime, will they be brought to book for that fraudulent misrepresentation as they allege? But for me, unfortunately, I must say, this is not the end of KPMG's troubles with that statement that said, don't rely on certain sections of the report we issued in terms of SARS. It is just only the beginning of the problems. But the most important question, Cindy, we must ask is the following. Who exactly unduly pressurized KPMG executives, and more so in the UK, to take this unprecedented step, which on the face of it is unlawful, and if anything, has only just triggered an avalanche that's going to sink this company? Who is that person? What did they stand to benefit? Because of late, we saw people like Magda Wieschke, who runs Signia Asset Management, which has got 127 billion rand under management, together with some of the CEOs within Business Leadership South Africa, wanting to put pressure on KPMG to have taken this unlawful step. And that is something that now needs to be investigated as to why that undue pressure, and that undue pressure, who are the sponsors, so that we need to go the whole hog in terms of holding all parties responsible, including the likes of Magda Wieschke, including the likes of Business Leadership South Africa, and their entire membership, who have been nothing short of politicians, when their corporate earnings, by the way, have been dismal. I've just looked at the share price of Signia, went
we'll
down
come back
5%
to that
today.
thought. We also have Miamezeli, Boy ANC MP, joining us. Good evening to you, Mr. Boy. What are Scopa's concerns regarding the whole SARS KPMG debacle?
Scopa is concerned because it involves the taxpayers' money. And we want to know how much has been spent in this whole saga. And why would an institution that is supposed to be credible, KPMG, would collapse that relationship in the manner they have done? Because these are constitutional bodies and they need to be respected. But it involves the taxpayers' money. Now we need to know exactly what has happened here. Because nobody can easily withdraw knowingly that the money that they are using is the money of the taxpayers. And Scopa would be behind
if you just give us the details as well, as much as possible, in terms of the role that you will play in this matter.
Quite clearly that Scopa, we've already indicated that we are just concerned about what has been happening. And that the disrespect of our institution is one of the things that KPMG to have come back and be able to clarify to us. What happened in the rogue unit is not what Scopa is interested about. We are interested to know exactly how much money is being spent in the collapsing of our relations. KPMG has been holding us accountable in quite a number of institutions of our government. And they suppose they've been aware that breaking that relationship, when we collect or when we look at evidence in front of us, KPMG is being mentioned all the time.
But are you planning to summon KPMG as a multinational? We've seen a large number of the executives resigning. Will you hold them accountable on the veracity and quality and credibility of their work?
We have to, because it has got huge implications. Politicians are not auditors. They were auditing, and we were looking at their statements and welcoming whatever they were presenting to us. Now that they themselves have put themselves against the wall by withdrawing that relationship, they don't understand that in Treasury, where we are looking for accountability, in every institution of the government, Treasury's, KPMG's name is being mentioned, and we need to be able to follow up and ask them that, can we use those reports into the future of our country. They've got huge implications for our country itself.
Please stay with us. We'll come back to you, Mr. Boy. Mr. Dixon, just in your view, especially with previous work that KPMG has done, why should there not be any suspicion in terms of either wrongdoing or misrepresentation or misleading the public?
At this point, there should be suspicion of wrongdoing and misrepresentation. I think this is an opportune time for all public sectors, public institutions to, commission to the public protector to ensue a class action investigation into all of the works KPMG has conducted for the state, to investigate the credibility of all the work KPMG has conducted for the state, and consider, also sort of legal action, because if they've done it once, they could have done it many times before. And it's important that we get that sort of clarity. But importantly here, this is an indication to us that auditing is a very, very important exercise. It gives us an indication that auditing firms can be controlled. And if that's the case, we then question all auditing firms. Unfortunately, that's the sort of questioning the auditing industry is going to have to face because of one rotten potato. Importantly here then, I think it's an opportune time for the Auditor General to step in to re-establish credibility in that industry, because I think, KPMG's first exercise is going to be a PR exercise where Unhlamulo, the interim CEO or the new CEO of KPMG, is going to have to re-establish the credibility of the organization going forward. I hope that doesn't include a large-scale retrenchment of workers. And Mhlamula, coming from a human resource background, will keep the interest of the workers intact over there. But importantly here, in the pursuit to establish credibility for the industry, again, I think clarity must be given about all work that KPMG has done for the state and maybe even for the public generally.
Mr. Gode, are you surprised that there hasn't really been a huge exodus of clients of KPMG when one could use an analyst's point of view that they have become the architects of corruption and abuse in the country? But this was relating to the Gupta leaks, and now coming to SARS. How do you then view the extent of the work or damage that KPMG has done in the country?
Well, look, I can assure you, if KPMG was a black-owned company, there would be a lot of brouhaha about it being banned completely from doing business with government. But it being a white-owned company, a multinational company, well, they're not supposed to be corrupt. In fact, if you look at the press conference that SARS had, most of the media, it became more about SARS than about KPMG. So we have to understand that the challenge of the narrative in our country has always been anything black is corrupt and anything not black, well, it must be given the benefit of the doubt or it should be explained away. So I think it is going to be based on how they perform when they engage with us in Parliament and the extent to which we're able to really lay bare the rot that might be there within KPMG. And I think part of what we may need to do, I'm just thinking aloud, how do we get the regulatory body on board? How do we get National Treasury on board? So that the discussion is not only limited to KPMG, but also to other role players that are directly impacted by the work that KPMG does. And I think that is what will finally ultimately lead to a reconsideration of whatever contract that KPMG might have, whether in government or in the private sector.
Just before we let you go, are you also looking to subpoena or summon former SARS commissioners, including Ivan Pillay, former Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan, who was SARS commissioner during his tenure? Are you looking to summon those former commissioners as well?
Look, I think this area of focus is KPMG and its activities. And it's only beyond that we could look at who else is involved. I have my own theory. You see, if I was not talking here as Scopa chair, I would go into my theory of the politics behind this whole shenanigans of sudden withdrawal. I mean, if you withdraw the findings, the conclusions, and the recommendations, what is it that is left of the report, and what is SARS supposed to do with whatever is left of the so-called report? It's crazy.
All right,
That's crazy.
Mr. Godi, we're going to leave it there. That's Themba Godi, Chairman of the Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Public Accounts. Mr. Boy, with SARS, though, or rather SARS have wanted the company to be blacklisted, as we pose the question to Mr. Godi. Are you of the view that all their work now needs to be reviewed and possibly taken off the government database?
SARS would not be unfair because they've been dealing with the institution itself. And of course, Scopa will also have to look at that particular one after we've been able to collect a lot of evidence within the state itself of how they've been functioning and why today they suddenly decided to put it aside. After they themselves has got 8 people from the top echelons to resign without informing the state, without informing anybody, making us aware that what is it that is going on there. You see, it's like an admission of guilt.
Is it in Scopa's interest to also investigate the SARS unit, as you earlier mentioned, that the taxpayers' money is at stake?
We will be conducting probe into the establishment itself so that they can provide us with the evidence. We don't know how much has been spent on the work that they've done with SARS. We'll await when we call SARS to come and account, to be able to give us the figures of how much this relationship have cost us, so that the taxpayers in South Africa can know what is going on.
Mr. Mnyamezeli Shadrack Boy, ANC MP and member of Scopa, thank you indeed. Just coming back, maybe if you were to give us a sense, one thing that SARS Commissioner Tom Moyane keeps lamenting, or rather bemoaning, he says he wants to know who is behind this, what is it all about. Mr. Godi saying off record, quote unquote, that there seems to be a political interference in this space. Tepo?
Look, the only people who can assist us out of this very invidious position we find ourselves in as a country is the executives who were fired. Because somewhere in between, we know as a matter of record that in 2016, KPMG was put under unprecedented pressure to have to no longer be the auditors for Oak Bay Group of companies. The question is that pressure, who did it come from? They've admitted as much that they were put under pressure. So they must confess now as to who is that group of persons or individual that put them under that undue pressure which was unlawful. That is on the one hand. Of course, when we look at SARS is it is in fact their fiduciary duty to have come up with the recommendations that they've come up with, but also the course of action that they internally want to follow. And amongst many, of course, being that of reviewing all other work done by KPMG, because that is the only way that we can be able to know the truth. The truth of either way, whether who is this a masked person who now we have to lift the curtain upon them that have been putting this unlawful, undue pressure on KPMG, or if indeed here we are dealing with a rotten institution to the core. So that course of action by SARS needs to be supported. But the rogue unit, by the way, it is not dependent on the KPMG report. The Sikakani report that has not been referred to as much still stands to this day, has never been challenged. And one of the puzzling things, by the way, also that came up is, of course, the involvement of the former prosecutor, Advocate Gerinel, in the purchasing, met contact, nohal, cash, the surveillance equipment that was then used, when at the end of the day, under the laws of this country, there are only 3 agencies that can perform surveillance functions. How is it possible that here we had private citizens with surveillance equipment spying on citizens, and we find that to be acceptable? All the people that were involved, and the former SARS commissioner, Mr. Pravin Gordhan, this one, he can't do PR on it. He has to come and answer, and those are the facts. We have to know now what must be done against the wrongdoers, and they must be punished. All
right, let's get a view from Mlondi Mkiza, ANC Youth League spokesperson. Mlondi, thanks so much for your time. What do you make of the response from almost nonchalant, really, from KPMG saying they're willing to pay back SARS and also benevolently give 40 million rand that they had made with the transaction of Oak Bay back to NGOs?
Well, the first interesting part for us as the Youth League is the fact that KPMG seeks to be suggesting that it is removing certain portions of the report. And one wonders why those sections, first of all, but secondly, why bring the reputation into question with the certain sections that you have known about for such a long time? After all, you are the ones that produced the report. When you have done so, you have surrendered that report to SARS with all the right and corporate responsibilities of keeping that report as a report of SARS. You then go against that and want to go public. Those are the things that we should be speaking about. And what we must ask really is the fact that it seems that white controlled and particularly conglomerate companies in South Africa have got a way of breaking the law and just get really a warning. There is a consistency to this. You speak of the banks, they just get fined, that's all of it. Them even fined half of what they made, they are just fined 10%, and all of those things. These are problems that we ought to deal with at a deeper level. But obviously, we ought to be interested what brings about this. Who is this person that nerves have been touched so much that such an institution can take such a decision? The willingness to pay back the 23 million, for instance, is something that ought to be looked at as not just as an indication of KPMG wanting to pay back the money, but the extent in which they are prepared to protect those that are responsible behind the scenes in changing these portions of these reports and suggesting that actually you are bringing the entire report into question.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks indeed. We'll continue just after a short break. Mlondi Mkhize, ANC Youth League spokesperson, Oliver Dixon, a social political commentator, and Tsepo Khadima, political commentator and analyst. Thanks indeed for you at home for joining us. So we take a quick break. We'll see you on the other side.